So what you're looking at is a very handy barrier glove that creates a sort of a natural blocker between the pinky and the outside of my palm when I'm drawing on any kind of paper. I will use this as I work. It fits on both hands. It's sort of reversible, and it allows me the grip and the freedom of using my drawing fingers, to hold on to whatever I'm using to draw, and it protects the paper from absorbing all the oils and the moisture in my pinky and my palm, and even this one I rest, sometimes to create some leverage. I almost exclusively do all of my drawing, my pre-drawing sort of planning with these big number 2 Click pencils. Number 2 is also HB, that hard bold. HB you'll see in most like professional graphite drawing pencils. H is hard, B is bold. It'll go typically, the scale will go from typically 6H, which is super hard, to 6B, which is super soft. The harder the graphite, the lighter the line, the bolder the graphite, the darker the line. I love these Click pencils because there's also these really great white erasers just sort of stock with the pencils. I don't have to worry about sharpening. All I have to do is worry about refilling, and honestly, I've had their same refill canisters since 1998. I've also had the same gum erasers since just about that time. The cool thing about the gum erasers is you can knead them like I'm demonstrating right now to kind of give them like a fresh new feel. They smell really fantastic. I do dare you to smell them, and the coolest thing about the gum eraser is that they don't damage or destroy the paper. They just stick to, they kind of rub and will just grab at whatever you're drawing, and it's just a very gentle eraser for drawings. I also use an elliptical white eraser. It's it comes with these long tube white eraser refills, kind of similar to what the white erasers are in the end of the big pencils. You can load batteries here, and then you press the button and it'll spin, and you can do your fine erasing here. When I used to draw all the time, I did not use barrier. I did not use an eraser or a chamois to blend. Now I do. And here's why. Because the oil, when it's absorbed from your hand into the paper, it collects more of the drawing material, the graphite, the charcoal, and the oil, the spots on the paper that absorb the oil will appear darker, and you can sometimes see fingerprints. And so I no longer do that. After erasing with the shavings, I'll use this brush, sort of a cleanup brush. If I didn't have a cleanup brush back in the day, I used my gesso brush. I just made sure that the brush I was using to kind of wipe away the eraser shavings and the excess drawing material was a water-based paint brush. Otherwise, the oil from the brush that inevitably gets left in the brush, no matter how well you clean it, will transfer to the paper. I've never experimented with that. It would probably make a wonderful experiment to work with the oil versus the water, especially with a watercolor painting. And I have worked with waxes and caustics, and I recommend that process as well. I may cover those later in different videos. For now, we're going to keep it simple we're going to stick with the watercolor. Typically, I'm very hard on my brushes. I always have been. That said, I've kept them for decades. Some of those old gesso brushes and painting brushes I kept for years, and back when I was oil painting, I had those brushes basically from 1998 to when I moved in 2021. If you take proper care of your brushes and use basic ingredients to clean them, you can keep them for many years, which is wonderful. My largest watercolor brush for big sweeps in the background is a size 14. Each brush is going to be numbered with the size that refers to like the thickness of the line. This set I purchased for illustration, but it's also been handy for all of those bug paintings. If you've seen those, I can do another video where I show you my recent watercolor works, completed works prior to working on the process. And then they go down in size to 0, which is a sort of a detail brush, and I have even smaller detail brushes than that. These are the brushes that I use. Cheaper brushes. It's kind of like with shoes and roofs. The cheaper the brush, the more hair is going to come out into your painting. So be prepared for that. With watercolor, it's not super forgiving. So I do recommend higher quality brushes for watercolor, because like I said, it's an investment that you won't have to continuously replace, and that won't kind of continuously ruin paintings with random brush hair falling out. Or sometimes cheaper brushes, the metal finger guard will separate from the brush stick. That's super annoying as well. Basically, after every use, after every round of painting, I'll just take some soap and water, and I will clean my brushes, and then set them on their ends to dry in like a cup or whatever I've used as a paintbrush holder. Next is paints. I'm going to show you. You can get some high quality paintings out of the cheapest supplies, and I love that. So if you are on a budget, you can still manage your technique around less expensive supplies. Obviously, this is a really good display of why I don't prefer the cake sort of block watercolor palettes, because it's easy for them to get muddy. It's really easy for you to compromise the brightness and the actual color with mixing. And for me, it's kind of hard because I don't have really great boundaries, and so I will mix often right in the cake, and I won't clean my brush between, and that's just an extra added step. But I know a lot of people who manage to make fabulous, phenomenal watercolor paintings out of these cake block watercolor paints. I'll drop some water into each block, let it soften a little bit, and then we're good to go. Use this lid as the mixing palette, or I'll even use an external palette if I want to keep this clean, because I want to close it at the end and don't want things to get super muddy. That is reasonable as well. So these are super portable, super lightweight. You can even put your favorite brush in here. It's just handy for field work if you want to go do quick sketches, quick tests. It's cool to have this around for experiments, see if things will work, and you don't want to use your other more high-end final project paints. These are fantastic for experimentation. And then purchasing these paints can be really intimidating. Bunch of new words, bunch of new names of colors that aren't what you necessarily expect going in buying paint colors for the first time. And so these can be very, very casual, not intimidating. And like I said before, if you use them right, you can make really phenomenal paintings with these as well. Not throwing shade to these Cake Black watercolor paints. They have my heart. This is how I did a lot of my earliest paintings, and to be real, they are some of the best still. So my next set I purchased was this, and this was it. I might have purchased a zinc or titanium white, but this was really it. I sort of didn't believe in white at the time. I decided to use yellow in place of white and make everything kind of glow warmer, but kind of like my gum eraser and my old school elliptical eraser and my first watercolor brushes. I've had these paints for at least 13 years, and they're still good. I could still use them. A little hardened, lost some moisture, but it's easy to restore that and continue using them. I re-upped once. This green I purchased kind of to make a black. And I've made some really exceptional blacks with this mix of colors. The red is a cadmium red medium. The yellow is a cadmium yellow pale. This is a Hooker's green deep, and then cobalt blue. This is not a price that reflects inflation, but this was a great way to transition into using tube oil paints as opposed to those cake patties. I love this set. I thought this was very high quality, and I got a lot of run in a lot of paintings out of these. I decided though, when I began painting the Wildwood Farm Sanctuary paintings, the farm animal paintings, the goats, the bull, and the possum, that I needed something a little bit larger. And I tried to kind of keep the same hues in mind when I purchased. And when I purchased the first time, I did not purchase an ivory black. I only purchased these four, and this is the palette I'm currently using. This is the palette I will use with the next painting, the one that I'll walk you through step by step, and I love them. Ponset yellow is the closest to cadmium yellow pale, cobalt blue, cadmium red deep, olive green, and titanium white opaque. Pretty universal brand of watercolor tubes, meaning I can find them in Eugene, I can find them online, I can find them in Salem, and that's important to me. If you see and look closely, there are these series number, usually goes up to 5. Here's series 2, here's series 1. The series kind of refers to the quality and the cost of the paint. The higher the series number, the higher the quality and the higher the cost. When they say high quality, they mean high viscosity, sort of a little bit less will go a longer way. Generally, I stayed away from black because I always thought it was better to mix my black. Now, as a parent and kind of, you know, budgeting my time, I get a black, and I'll use a white to illustrate and to make certain subjects pop. I think that's just about it. Oh, one last thing. My palettes, I keep them dirty and dry and like dried out, because and this is the value of using watercolor as opposed to, let's say, acrylic. In these open air palettes, I can just add water and there you go. There's my kind of golden orange that I used from before, my lighter yellow, and you know, my browns and reds. I've realized though that the higher the series also refers to like these paints that dry overnight or over weeks, and the palette will stay stickier and easier to bring back to life. The lower the series, like that series 1 titanium, has a harder time coming back to life when I reuse it in my palette. And I'm kind of weird about my palette, so from painting to painting, I like to have some, most, or if not all colors kind of transfer over, so that there's you know, color unity, palette unity from painting to painting. And so I have 2 of these, use these fairly regularly. That's what my palettes look like for watercolor. For acrylics, so I'll kind of pan up here. For those acrylic jars, the series is the same. The lower the series, the lower the cost and the lower the quality. Again, with the cobalt, I had to settle with the Naphthol Utrecht Red, which is a little bit lighter than I normally like, but it still works. For these, I will use glass jars with lids that seal to pre-mix large quantities of colors, so that I can retain that palette through multiple paintings. And then I'll always have an empty palette on hand. This one is kind of a multi-use palette. Sometimes it'll carry the acrylic, sometimes it'll carry the India ink that I use. I use Dr. Martin's Bombay India ink, an alcohol-based ink, to clean the brushes, to clean the palette. With the India ink, I will use rubbing alcohol, since it's alcohol-based. So there you have it. Looks like we are pretty close to ready to get into the process.